Dear guests, welcome to Loyola Marymount University. I'm Katerina Zacharia, Professor of Classics in the Department of Classics and Archaeology. My scholarly work explores Greek ethnic identity formation, cultural politics and representations of classical antiquity in visual and performance culture, investigating how Greekness has been constructed, contested, and reimagined from the archaic period to the present day. In my 2008 edited volume, Hellenism's Culture, Identity, and Ethnicity from Antiquity to Modernity, we begin our examination of Greek ethnicity from 776 BCE, the traditional date of the first Olympic Games, because it is only with the archaic period and the development of pan-Hellenic institutions like the Olympics and the rise of enemies like Persia that Greek self-consciousness becomes discernible in our sources. The ancient Olympics were not merely athletic competitions. They were ritual performances of Greekness in itself, moments where city-states temporarily suspended their conflicts to affirm a shared Hellenic identity. We continue our scholarly examination through the Byzantine, Ottoman, and modern eras. We explore Greek culture and ethnicity as constructed identity, who produces representations of Greekness, how meaning is negotiated in context of asymmetrical power, how the four criteria of Herodotus on Hellenism, that is shared lineage, language, religion, and customs, have been deployed, challenged, and transformed across millennia. Tonight, I have the extraordinary privilege of introducing an artist who in 2004 performed precisely this scholarly inquiry on the world's largest stage. Dimitris Papaioannou transformed the opening ceremony of the Athens 2004 Olympic Games into a profound meditation on the construction and performance of Greek identity, what it means, who defines it, how it speaks to universal human possibility. Dimitris Papaioannou did not merely stage a spectacle. He created what he calls a birthplace, a profound visual essay on the awakening of human consciousness on Greek soil. As scholars of the classical world, we spend our lives excavating the material and intellectual remains of ancient Greece. We parse verb forms, measure temple foundations, trace the evolution of artistic forms across centuries. But rarely do we witness someone who can make these ancient stones breathe again, who can transform the tremendous step, the moment when the Kouros detached himself from his stone matrix, into a living theatrical event witnessed by 4 billion people worldwide. Papaioannou achieved precisely this on August 13, 2004. What makes his work particularly significant for us as classicists is his profound understanding that Greek art is not merely decoration or nationalist nostalgia. It is, as he describes it, the history of a land. His ceremony was built on a radical premise that the contribution of the peoples who flourished in these geographic coordinates, from Cycladic sculptures to Maria Callas, from Phidias to contemporary Greek artists, remains universally apparent and profoundly relevant. But the question was never whether to draw upon this heritage. The question was how. Papaioannou's answer reveals both artistic genius and scholarly rigor. For 3 years, he and his team, including composer Yorgos Koumendakis, scenographer Lili Pezanou, and the visionary costume and makeup artist Angelos Mendis, undertook what can only be described as a systematic study of Greek cultural history. They examined art history, the history of the Olympic Games, the evolution of the modern games, and the very concept of what distinguishes Greek identity. They were, in essence, conducting research that would make any classicist envious. The result was a ceremony structured on 4 foundational axes. First, it was radically art-centered. Every image the world saw came from the work of artists who lived on Greek soil across the millennia, brought to life by their contemporary counterparts. Second, its demeanor was one of concentrated dignity rather than externalized joy. Third, an electric current of sensuality ran through everything, from the phallic symbolism of the flame to the sacred sexuality of the snake goddess. Finally, a secret geometry organized the space of the stadium itself, creating what Papaioannou describes as a spatial adventure that would subconsciously lead to euphoria at the ceremony's climax. That's a quote. Consider the opening sequence, a 6-story Cycladic head emerging from a flooded stadium, breaking apart to form the Cycladic archipelago, the islands of the Cyclades themselves, a culture from the 2nd millennium BCE, from islands that were quintessential spaces of maritime exchange. By beginning with the Cyclades, he presented Greek identity as fundamentally insular, that is, arising from islands and from encounter between islands. This was not mere theatrical virtuosity. It was a visual argument about the relationship between geography and ideas, between topos and logos. As Papaioannou explains, and that's a quote, land forms ideas, ideas form the land, two contrasting truths overlaid. Geography and identity are mutually constitutive. Greek identity has always been constructed through narratives of transformation, from chaos to cosmos, from myth to philosophy. Papaioannou stages this narrative with stunning clarity. The ceremony's intellectual architecture traced the journey from mythos to logos, from a red centaur, half human, half animal, walking on water, to a man balancing on a rotating cube, symbolizing the Earth's dual rotation around the sun and on its axis. This is Greek thought made visible, the transition from mythological to rational consciousness, from collective dream to individual responsibility. The centaur, embodying hybridity, hands the baton to the man of reason, who must balance on rotating axis, a perfect image for the examined life, for philosophy as perpetual questioning. When the centaur looked back at the man on the cube in a final gesture of farewell, we witnessed the moment when humanity handed the baton from myth to reason, the transition from mythos to logos, but also the acknowledgement that myth never fully disappears. In my course, Representations of Greece, Ancient and Modern, I asked students to investigate how stereotypes are linked to contextual negotiations of identity. I teach students to distinguish between closed representations that fix identity as essential and unchanging, and open representations that acknowledge identity as constructed, contested, and fluid. Papaioannou's ceremony is remarkably open. Rather than presenting Greek culture as the achievement of a singular ethnic group, he stages it as arising from geographic and cultural exchange. The ceremony features Björk, an Icelandic artist, singing as the Mediterranean Sea itself, claiming all athletes as her children. She sings, "Your sweat is salty, I am why." As Papaioannou said, and that's a quote, "When I read these lyrics, I was shaken. This is the most beautiful Olympic song of all time." This matters because the ancient Olympics were brutally exclusive. Only freeborn Greek men could compete. Papaioannou's ceremony begins with a Minoan snake goddess and ends with a pregnant woman whose womb glows with light. A young couple kisses passionately, the first kiss on the mouth in Olympic ceremony history. These choices refuse ancient exclusions while celebrating the philosophical and artistic innovations that emerged from Greek culture. The Nobel laureate poet George Seferis provided the ceremony's conceptual frame with his meditation on Greece's traumatic bond with antiquity. And that's his poem that is read by Lydia Koniardou. "I walk with a marble head in my hands. It exhausts my elbow, and I don't know where to put it down. It was falling into the dream as I was coming out of the dream. So our life became one and will be very difficult for it to separate again." This is the condition Hellenisms explores in scholarly writing, and this is the condition Papaioannou explored. How do contemporary Greeks, indeed, how does contemporary humanity relate to the almost unbearable weight of classical culture? How do we honor inheritance without being crushed by it? How do we engage tradition without becoming traditionalist? What elevates Papaioannou's work beyond mere cultural propaganda is his ability to invest public spectacle with private meaning. His conception of Eros flying over the Cycladic Sea was not abstract allegory, but deeply personal. As he reveals in his recent interview, he first fell in love in the Cyclades at the age of 19, an experience that became a fierce, and that's a quote, inspiration for life and a passion for creation. When he designed Eros's wings for the ceremony, he copied them from a specific statue that held personal significance. This is how art transcends propaganda. When the artist finds the point where private memory and public symbol converge. The ceremony's centerpiece, what Papaioannou calls the clepsydra, the water clock, featured a dreamlike procession of Greek art through history, from the Minoan snake goddess to a pregnant woman with a womb of light. Led by Angelos Mendis with choreography by Angeliki Stelatou and music by Konstantinos Vita, this sequence achieved something remarkable. It presented 3 millennia of artistic evolution not as a museum catalogue, but as a living organism shedding its skin and moving towards the future. When the pregnant woman stepped on the water and the sea became a galaxy, when twin helices of DNA rose from the same spot where the Cycladic head had emerged, the ceremony declared that the Greek contribution was the method of inquiry, the philosophical life that Socrates said was the only life worth living. These are not purely Greek forms. They show Egyptian influences, Near Eastern motifs, cross-cultural exchanges. The clepsydra presents cultural identity not as property to be guarded, but as a gift to be shared, transformed, and reimagined. Human self-discovery continues, and the new know yourself belongs to science. As scholars, we should attend carefully to what Papaioannou accomplished, because it offers a model for how classical culture can speak to the present without either fossilizing into nostalgia or dissolving into kitsch. His approach was neither reverential museum keeping nor postmodern irony. Instead, he treated Greek art as living language capable of articulating contemporary concerns. Consider his treatment of the kouros and its evolution into the contrapposto of the Critias boy, the slight shift of weight that suggests individual agency and interior life, where Papaioannou quotes in his recent interview Kenneth Clark, as he observed in his book, The Nude, A Study in the Ideal Form, that this is the first beautiful nude in art. But more importantly, it represents the birth of the individual citizen. Papaioannou presents this not as art history minutiae, but as a political and philosophical revolution. The moment when the individual became visible, when democracy and tragedy were born, while the smile of the archaic kouros disappeared and was replaced by the serious face of the world's first citizen. This is classics as it should be taught, not as dead forms, but as living ideas that shaped human possibility. Democracy is born, Athenian tragedy emerges. The individual becomes responsible for examining their own life. The ceremony achieved what Papaioannou calls the end of guilt about Greek antiquity. Rather than apologizing for or ironizing the classical heritage, he celebrated it while acknowledging the, and quote, chaos, corruption, and madness are clearly visible. But the ceremony was not the time for that critique. This was a time of celebration, he says. He created what he hoped would be, and I quote, a hybrid of avant-garde and pop, precisely what I hoped our ceremony would achieve. Doing so, he demonstrated that serious engagement with classical culture need not be solemn or academic. It can be sensual, playful, and emotionally overwhelming. The ceremony's technical achievement should not be underestimated. Papaioannou choreographed every detail: the aerial routes of fragments, the speed of fire forming Olympic rings, the ascent of an olive tree, with obsessive precision in 3D space. The result used more lighting fixtures than any entertainment event in history to that point. Yet this technological complexity served a humanistic vision. As he remarks, and I quote, "The show's grandiosity doesn't rule out intimacy. Celebration does not negate dignity. Joy is not necessarily externalized, and awareness of history doesn't mean passive submission." This is what he called monumental minimalism, the ability to work at enormous scale while maintaining human measure, emotional authenticity, intellectual precision. Papaioannou achieved this very paradox, a ceremony witnessed by 4 billion people that nevertheless felt intimate, personal, even vulnerable. We welcome today an artist who has spent the 2 decades since Athens creating a body of work that continues his dialogue with Greek culture and the human form. His pieces Primal Matter, The Great Tamer, Still Life, Transverse Orientation, Ink, return obsessively to bodies, fragments, transformation, and the tension between myth and reason. He's worked with Pina Bausch, directed the opening ceremony of the 2015 European Games in Baku, and continued to explore what he calls, and I quote, his omnipresent obsessions: the body, animalistic nature, beauty, and identity. But tonight, we honor him specifically for his work on the Athens 2004 Olympic Games opening ceremony, which he titled Birthplace. He did not merely represent Greek culture, he identified the moment and place where certain fundamental human capacities were born. The capacity for self-reflection, for individual dignity, for democracy, for tragedy, for the philosophical life. He showed us not just what ancient Greeks achieved, but how they achieved it, through encounter, exchange, transformation. The willingness to break forms apart and recombine them in new configurations. He showed us the birthplace of the examined life. As we watch excerpts from his ceremony and hear him speak about his creative process, I invite you to consider not just the spectacular images, but the intellectual architecture that supports them, the scholarly questions they engage, the pedagogical possibilities they open. Here is an artist who thinks like a scholar and creates like a poet, who can move seamlessly between personal memory and cultural analysis, between technical precision and emotional abandon. He is, in the best sense, what the Greeks would call a technites, a craftsman whose technique is inseparable from wisdom, whose making is also knowing. Dimitris Papaioannou gave the world a gift in 2004. He reminded us that Greek culture is not a dead weight to be born or a pure essence to be guarded, but a living process of inquiry, transformation, and exchange, a living force that can still shape how we imagine human possibility. 20 years later, in a world increasingly drawn towards xenophobia and ethnic nationalism, his work remains urgently relevant. He offers us a model for how to engage cultural heritage while refusing the closure that transforms celebration into chauvinism, tradition into traditionalism, pride into supremacy. In my edited volume, Hellenisms, we argue that Greek identity has always been constructed through performance, negotiation, and contestation, that there is no single authentic Greekness, but rather multifarious mantles of Greek ethnicity. Papaioannou's ceremony performs this argument with beauty, intelligence, and profound humanity. He shows us that the question is not whether to engage Greek heritage, but how to celebrate without excluding, how to honor tradition without becoming its prisoner, how to find in ancient Greek culture resources for the examined, cosmopolitan, generous life we need today. The 2-week LMU residency for Dimitris Papaioannou is made possible through the sponsorship of a generous donation to the Department of Classics and Archaeology, and is co-sponsored with the Department of Dance and the Dean of the College of Bellarmine Arts and the Dean of the College of Communications and Fine Arts. My gratitude goes out to our student assistants, senior administrative assistants, theater operators, and you, our audience. Thank you for attending. Please join me in welcoming this remarkable artist, Mr. Dimitris Papaioannou.